So how did this begin?
More importantly, is this
Yeah,
someone
but
you have fun
how
with?
did this begin? Huh? You're at
Sorry?
fault. Yeah, how did this begin?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, Zulu's already in there, and when I came in the room, because I wasn't there the whole time, I mean, Steve's hangouts were a little too long for my liking and stuff. But what ended up happening is that when I went in there, it was just him talking about how, oh, the scientists are basically trying to hide, the evidence of young Earth creationism from us, and all this conspiracy talk about how there's a big conspiracy, which is why young Earth creationism isn't doing so well. And then it transformed from that into somehow talking about the Bible. I can't remember exactly how we got on this subject, but it's transformed into the conversation where now we have Zulu basically trying to defend those verses in the Bible where it looks like God said that you could take these women for yourselves, and then even if they don't want to, they're kind of stuck with them. So it's like a lot of atheists kind of say it's like implied rape. And then you have Zulu trying to defend all those verses and basically making an apology for rape. So if you guys are going to say that's not what the verses mean because that's not the original context or whatnot, it's like, that's fine, but that's not what Zulu was doing. He was going with that and saying, well, it's like it could be worse kind of scenario.
Yeah, I suppose he provided evidence to shit like, we're hiding young Earth creationism and shit.
that was another can of worms.
I thought that was wishful thinking. Hi, Christian.
Hey, what's going on?
Hiding young Earth creationism. How in the world can you do something like that?
Yeah, especially when it's so prominent out there.
I can hide something that doesn't exist, but okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you got the guy whose Ark Encounter thing went bankrupt, and then what do you do? Oh, you blame the atheists for the reason why you are a failure as a businessman.
Well, yeah, but we're talking basically about the craziness that is Zulu.
Well, here's my experience with the guy, and this is where I've actually had him twice admit that he's wrong.
I'll be right back.
Right. First was self-defense. He thought that the idea of killing in self-defense to say defend your family and such was immoral. He thought that was like no different than going out and shooting someone for fun. He thought like those were the same exact.
No woman is gonna want him, Christian. No woman is gonna want him.
And that's where he now, because I told him I did a video on this with Veckel in response to a Muslim saying, "What did Jesus teach? He taught that you need to stay there, pray for the man as he rapes it and kills your wife and daughter. That's what Jesus taught, and Christians don't do this." And then a bunch of other things. And me and Beckel went into all the verses about Old and New Testament about the concept of self-defense. After Zulu saw that, after directing him there, he apologized saying, "I was wrong, you're right." And then I forget who it was when we were talking to another Muslim. He said David wasn't a prophet. Zulu said that David was not a prophet of God. And so so where do you get this idea?
I think he's starting to hang out elsewhere. I'll give you the link.
All right, but yeah, he said that David wasn't a prophet, and so then I'm like, okay, so why do you say this? Like, well, can you name me one time that he prophesied like Samuel did or like Ellen G. White did and all that stuff? I'm like, I don't have to. Read Acts chapter 29, or it was Acts chapter 2, 29, where it says that where it calls David clearly a prophet, and then said, well, okay, you're right on this one. So, I mean, it's weird to me how this whole thing is turning out with him at times, and to me, I think he just needs to. I personally think he needs to start studying more, because he said to himself, like, he won't defend his Seventh-day Adventist faith to me in a debate because he hasn't studied it as much. So I think in the same sense, if he's going to make claims like this about the Bible and such, he needs to actually study it a little more before he actually starts going out being an apologist on this kind of stuff. Otherwise, he's then going to start acting like this, and then Who knows? Maybe 2 days later, he's going to take back what he said about something.
Yeah. So, I mean, CA earlier in Steve's hangout, he was saying that physicist at university, I'm actually in a large conspiracy, basically ultimately with Satan in regards to modern science.
I can believe
Are you
it.
talking about Zulu?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Must you?
And so modern physics and all is in cahoot with this grand
But
conspiracy.
yeah, I don't think that's. Yeah, I think that's wrong. But like, still, he just spent the last 2 hours being hangered by Steve and his group. I'll shut up.
Yeah, well, I think there's some points that we didn't get to address, though.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
No, I was just repeating to see what you know the questions I was asking him about.
That's fine if that's what's going on, but like still.
Well, I don't know. Like, what exactly is your position then? Because you seem kind of contrarian.
I asked him the question.
Me?
I asked him the question. What has creation science benefited modern, the modern society? Like, has creation science been used to give us modern technology? And he says he admitted no, but if creation science was allowed the room to do that sort of thing, it would. And so then I'm like, okay, what facet of creation science would actually provide? Because as far as we can tell, the old Earth science, the science that demonstrates the Earth is old and so on, is doing just fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
I mean, that's the thing. That's what I say.
Yeah.
If you want to say you're in believing in creation science and such, I mean, to me, I have no problem if you believe that, because honestly, that's just you having a worldview perspective in regards to the actual other sciences on that.
Just don't bring it into my school.
But if you're going to say, right, exactly. But if you're going to say that, physics and all these things are, part of a conspiracy covering up, what's truly bringing something, I want, like, and you're saying creation science could probably do that, then I would like to know. If you say, okay, give it some room and it can provide these things, show me a testing model or something in which we can have that being brought about. Show me something where creation science can do something that can discover cures for illnesses, where it can help produce ideas in regards to how we can advance society. All these kinds of things that physics, biology, all these kinds of astronomy, all these other things help us do in understanding the universe and how to better advance in preparing and understanding how things work, as well as advancing our society. Right. So show something like that for creation science, rather it be in the old or young Earth creation science, because I think in both cases the issue of the field being creation science, meaning a field that's specifically aimed at that. I mean, that's
I'm
very
specifically
limited.
Mentioning young Earth creationists. I'm referring to young Earth creationists who obviously totally misunderstand or purposely deceive really bad, wrong science. Radiometric decay rates, all that stuff, which we need in order to do things like go to the moon and protect planet Earth from, deadly asteroids that may cause another extinction or something. Like, to us, and ironically, the Christian Church was at the forefront of this, and now it's just become this total anti-science, like it's part of the devil, and it just baffles me.
Yeah, that's something I've actually kind of wondered, like how are Christians historically on the forefront of the advent of scientific advancements, and now it seems like a lot of, well, at least popular Christians are like the antithesis of scientific advancement. Like you kind of come full circle.
That is because scientific advancement began.
Yeah, Reformation Europe.
One thing that
Europe is a highlight of that.
One thing that always amazes me is that I think the failing for the other side, or from the creationist side, young Earth particularly, is the fact that they don't understand science as a body of work must all work in unison. Chemistry must work with astronomy, must work with biology. They all must work in sync with each other. So you can't just like kind of pull out one piece of it and say, this doesn't work for us, but we're going to accept other pieces of science, because the whole body of work has to work in unison. And I think that's the kind of point. So when you say something like creation science, if you were to even take that body of work, creation science, and put it and replace evolution or evolutionary biology with creation science, it just wouldn't work with the rest of science. It wouldn't help explain. And I think that's the biggest issue.
I think it's fair if you have
There's
to look
such thing as
into
creation science. That's that's no different than when. I mean, am I the only person here that knows this or realizes this? Creation science is a word made up by people like Ken Ham to try and sound more significant. There is just science.
Like what kind of science is there really?
Creation science, of course, it's the pseudoscience, and the term was made in like the 1800s by the Seventh-day Adventists. Before that, they used to call it flood geology. So.
Right. It actually, ironically, it's all derived from that. It's derived from this understanding of a global flood and then how to account for that. Because what's very interesting is when Darwin, and even before Darwin, when you have Christian geologists being many, say, millions of years, because they didn't have any concept of radiometric decays and so on. They just took the Earth's size and calculated just by alone it would be maybe a few millions of years old, due to heat dissipation math calculations that they were looking at, and also salt precipitations and all that. They didn't have a problem. If you read, interestingly, if you read the Genesis commentaries back in the 1700s and 1800s, very well Christians were reading Genesis 1 in light of that finding. But for some reason, with the whole Darwin thing, Christians, so those who were writing in the academic journals, they were few and far, but the layman Christians were the loudest, and they were the most vocal, and as well, even there were more of them, and that was unfortunate. And they then had a louder voice. Then you have the Seventh-day Adventist Church add to that debate, like Henry Morris, that then kickstarted the whole thing in the was it the 50s or the 60s? And then ever since, it's just been this complete anti-science.
In the 60s, and actually before he made that book, The Great Flood, Christians leaned more towards the local flood view. And then he made the Great Flood book, and then people picked that up and started reading it, and they're like, oh, the Bible really teaches the global flood, but before that, people didn't have a problem with the local flood view.
So it's like people were smarter back then.
Yeah, you'll be surprised. Like even Calvin, like when you read 1500s, they cautioned. There's some terms in this passage we don't understand, and especially I'm quoting verbatim with Calvin. He said, and we must caution with respect to the findings that we don't, with the scriptures we don't understand, and allow the scientists over time to explain, and hence there will be like a correlation between a future scientific discovery and what the scriptures say.
Only more people did that.
I would like to ask the believers.
It was also Calvin that also said that, if you want to learn about scripture and such, that's in the church. But if you want to learn how the stars work and all that stuff, then you go to the laboratory for that. I believe that was another thing that he said.
That's actually a good quote. It's interesting. Yeah. There was an I forget when this article was, but they were talking about the question was, if they were to find, let's say, a civilization outside the Earth, some advanced civilization within the stars, would that drive religion to the coffers? Would that finally be the death knell in religion, to find alien life?
Oh, I've heard that question.
And it's interesting because I don't believe it would.
No, it would.
I've written. CA knows I've written extensively on that. Actually, it's actually a very ancient Christian perspective. It's called the Principle of Plentitude. It goes all the way back to, believe it or not, Paul himself. And Paul himself if there are quote unquote families in the heavens, so he's not speaking about where God is, he's literally speaking about the cosmos, then they have their derivative from God himself. Applies the cross in that regard. And so, believe it or not, ET life discussion goes back to the early church fathers.
So would let's say the alien life, would they serve God too? Would they be Christians also? Like, would they have the same principles as we would have?
So there was one guy who, I forgot his name, but he basically had a knee-jerk reaction, kind of like the young creationists. They have like a knee-jerk reaction where he said, "Oh, but then doesn't this mean that Christ has to constantly die and rise again on every planet that each civilization exists?" Curiously, other church fathers would point to certain key verses, like in Colossians 1. One act here on earth can be applied in like a multiplication sense to the other worlds, and so just this one act alone is sufficient for the whole universe to be. And yeah, and ever since that was stated, then there's no problem.
And the only thing is, I would sort of agree, but where I disagree, I guess, is just to me, I think the issue about the cross affects those that are affected by original sin, and I don't think that under any circumstances that back in the early days after Adam and Eve had the whole fallout, that a certain race of people.
Whoops.
What
Was
happened?
the person that was speaking, did they lag out or something?
No, he dropped out.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, if you're on mobile device, we call it a Google Quake, and everyone will just get kicked off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah, you're
happened.
back.
I like how many people left that time? Or was it just
Like 3 or 4?
Everybody on a mobile device.
I think you left.
No, not everybody.
Guys, we got raptured for a little bit.
Oh, cool. What's heaven like?
Well,
There were aliens there.
How the Armored Christian described it whenever he talked about the rapture is going to be like training Dragon Ball Z style, I swear that is never going to get old for me.
Will people finally be able to run with their arms behind their back and not have it hurt? Because anime characters do that, but if you actually try it, it really is painful.
Is there anyone in here that thinks science will eventually get to the point where it would conclusively prove that God does not exist? Or
I think they'll always will find a way to shoehorn it in.
I believe that, in the words of Carl Sagan, nothing will be able to put that out of business. Nothing.
Just because of the concept of itself.
I believe it's possible, but it's unlikely.
There are two major views of God: the classical view and the personal view. Is primarily a philosophical notion, and it's way beyond. It's beyond science's domain. It's not something science can really say anything about. It can help.
But that only puts it into an argument from ignorance. Like, since science can answer it,
it's philosophical. It either has to exist or it's impossible to exist. Depending on how you work it out, it may be a necessary being.
When you say the term God, that, as I know you guys are usually talking about the Christian God, and you're saying, like, even as someone who is not an atheist but not a Christian either, it's like there's so many different views that this God could have. Like, even if you were to prove scientifically he can't exist this way, maybe he can exist this other way. Like, there's no escaping that.
I'm gonna quote Darwin's deity for you then.
Sense being itself. So it's sort of like he has to exist because he is existence. It's weird.
That's a weird way of looking at it. Exactly. It's really weird. And then you can't really disprove that.
We're going to continue to believe this stuff.
What?
The only thing that I wish, maybe if people, I think the way you'd really have to look at it is to go more back in history and look the historicity of different things and all that, and actually look at the text and all that. And then we can actually get down to whether this Christian God has more credibility to it or not. But disproving a God in general, What, not using science? Yeah, I don't know.
I actually think it's possible. I think it's
history is
possible.
more your best bet.
I think it's possible to
curious.
maybe disprove certain gods. I think,
Well,
let's say,
yes,
for instance,
certain gods,
if we have, like,
Yeah.
let's say, time viewing or something like that. But, like, I think what Thaddeus was saying was true. There's always going to be some type of angle where you can still sneak in a god, because there's always going to be things we don't know.
Yeah,
and
but
that is where God
gods.
seems to lie.
Well, I mean, science has already disproved some gods. Like, there was never anything on top of Mount Olympus, so.
Like, again, I get like what Pin's saying. That's actually correct. It's specific gods, I think, that you can look at. But as far as getting rid of a concept in total, yeah, I don't think you can do that. Even science, I think, is probably the wrong route, because a lot of these things when it comes to God and all that is coming from old religious texts and all that. So I think a lot of the times it's like if you want to really go out there to quote unquote disprove gods, like don't get a scientist to do it. Like, get a historian or someone that looks at these things and sees, or can look at the culture and all that stuff.
Well,
Or maybe
the only reason why I say science is because right now in the great debate community, and even in the great debate, the issue is between science and religion, and it's because science is now encroaching onto what religion usually had a lot had its thing. And evolution is I think the forefront of this, because the religion says one thing, but science is saying something else, and that's where you have this conflict, and that's why we have these arguments.
Well, the thing is that there's a difference between proving if God exists, this concept of a God, and then proving if this particular God exists. And I think people are going about it the wrong way. Like, using science.
We subscribe to God exists simply because of the concept.
Well, I mean, science doesn't make me myself. It doesn't make me question God's existence, but it might make me question my interpretation of God, and so I'll modify my belief about God based on science, which is what we should do. We should align our belief with.
That's a good point.
Didn't the Dalai Lama say that?
Science has nothing to say about religion whatsoever. Its whole purpose is to provide viable predictions about the reality in which we live. It has nothing to say about religion. The war is completely on the side of the religious people, while science is just in its house working on its books, not paying attention to the crazy lady out the window throwing rocks.
That's the thing. They don't need to be enemies. They actually can work together quite well. Religion is in a totally different, really, category than science. Like, you're not going to be able to you're not going to really be able to disprove these deep, like, religious concepts and stuff with science.
Nor do we need to. The entire reason why there's suddenly a big revolution, the big revolution against religion, is because of the advent of the internet. Again, the more easy it becomes for any given society to communicate with one another, the more difficult it becomes for incorrect information to survive.
Well, I disagree. Go ahead, Drag. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that for me, I see this interesting, I guess you call it, phenomenon where you have people who are scientifically illiterate who create these boogeymen. But I think it is because some of them need to live the narrative, or excuse me, certain narratives in the Bible where, well, there will be a great struggle, there will be scoffers and mockers. And so some of them will willingly take up these positions and ignorantly, portray what's stated in science, and that they must read the Bible literally. And so now they have this eternal adversary, which is, worldly things, i.e. science. And for me, that's kind of what I see, because when I'm talking to Hilarious Zulu and some of these other cats, it's like, if they honestly wanted this information, they don't have to go to me. They could type in the same Google search that I use, same exact one, but they won't, because it's part, and maybe that's me attributing some motivation to them. I don't know, but the way that I feel is
they don't want to tread in the deep waters. That's all it is.
Yeah, because here's because I don't think this is a nefarious thing, like they're doing it to themselves, like on purpose and being dishonest. I think this is a weird sort of cognitive bias, because I used to be a creationist, back in the day, and you do this weird sort of mind game where you could still, like, at least for me, I still had no problem learning about like evolution and all that, but my brain wouldn't accept it as true. I just kind of had like this, I just kind of compartmentalize it in this, this would be kind of interesting if it were true.
I think I agree with the idea that it's true.
People with that
because
mentality are defending it the same way they would defend some sort of fan fiction on Star Wars that they.
Who said that the Bible's like the old comic book that never dies? It's like Spider-Man for real or whatever. It was just
Zulu's the younger
some weird
person,
book
right?
about it.
The one with the Kunta Kinte icon, is that who that was? Zulu's the younger person?
That's Shaka Zulu. It's not
Yeah,
Kunta
Zulu.
He was the one of the other chat thingy that was like 18 or something, am I correct?
Yeah,
Yes,
he
that
was
was
a
him.
kid that was kind of.
Well, then
he was
that is a
getting his shit
byproduct
pushed
of
in.
his youth. He's not interested in facts, and if you start cornering him with words, as I saw him do it 5 times, he'll put his fingers in his ears and start saying, la la la, I'm not listening.
Yeah.
But once again, there are people who are older that do this. For example, G-Man, that person that you guys keep talking about. But the bottom line is they're not interested in facts. They're defending it the same way you see kids and nerds and such whatever on the internet defending some sort of fan fiction that they're a fan of on some forum. It's the same behavioral pattern.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. That is, I see it, and it's kind of sad. And I don't know if it's always a byproduct of youth. I think it's also a byproduct of.
I think
I
also how you're
apologize.
raised as well.
I don't want anyone in here who happens to be religious in any. I don't want to say Christian because the reason why people keep talking about Christianity here is because I assume most of you are exposed to it most of the time. If we were all
Pretty
living
much.
in India,
You're North
we'd all be
America.
talking about Hinduism instead. But the bottom line is, you have the right to believe in anything you want, and I will and have defended that. But if you wish to assert your personal beliefs as objectively factual for others, then you have to actually provide evidence.
Which is
Yeah.
non-controversial
And I think
points
it's
for most I say thinking Christians. I'll say that for most thinking Christians, that's a very understandable, very reasonable point. And General Han Solo, so elegantly put earlier when we were talking about what's objective and what would be considered a proper justification for his claim that the Bible is objectively true. But what you'll get is, and I've had to kind of learn this as I've been on G+. It's not that religion makes people stupid or just I'm about to fucking die. I'm lagging. It's not that religion makes people stupid or some of these old tropes that you'll see a lot of these atheist groups will put out. It's that I think it's people's personality.
Yes.
Because if you see something within Christians, if you actually look and CA, is he still here? Because
No.
throw some shit his way. Fuck. Okay. If you notice
Christian man's here.
Calvinists. Okay, Christian man, and actually, well, I don't know. Christian, are you a Calvinist?
No, he's not. I'm sure he's not.
He's not. Okay. For those of you who know Calvinists, isn't there one personality defect that you may think that they all share? Because every single one of them that I've spoken to has a slight case of narcissism, and it's really uniquely tied.
Yeah,
it's tied to their theology. If you notice that this idea of being elect is really tied to kind of their really snarky attitudes and really narcissistic personality.
The problem with that is though is that everybody kind of has a little bit of narcissism.
That's what's so unique about CA is that even he himself, who does identify as a Calvinist, which by the way, he's a very thoughtful person. He allows the raw data to speak for itself, in his opinion, and hence that's why he happens to be a Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist because I interpret the raw data a little bit differently. But the point is, that's an excellent point because he himself, being a Calvinist, actually is not even regarded in the staunch Calvinist groups like the Council Google Plus or the Bible.
Oh yeah, those people.
Yeah,
they're fun.
In fact, I couldn't because I was trying to find a way to describe it, and you just hit the nail on the head. That even when I've had to interact with those people, it's a narcissistic, mentality that I've had to pretty much warm them up a little bit.
The problem is that
which I have noticed this narcissism chiefly expressing itself. I'm not sure how you mean it, but the way I've noticed it is if you were to reject their personal beliefs or say no thank you in any fashion, they become personally offended not because I mean, they shouldn't be in such a way that you're saying, no, thank you, I don't want to have pepperoni on my pizza, even though you like pepperoni on your pizza. But they get offended in such a way as if they themselves are the pepperoni and you're rejecting them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a unique intersection between a lot of Calvinist personalities and their theology, and especially how they put it forth. Because to me, I know some pretty repugnant atheists, but on the flip side of that, I would compare the really repugnant atheists to the narcissistic Calvinists, because I really don't see that brand of just really just nasty folks in any other Christian, I guess you call them sects, any other Christian sect.
Someone like Blue.
We're not going to talk about him, but it's we all know the types, right? They're just the
I'm not
firebrand atheists that the ones that kind of say what is that religion is a mental illness, that kind of shit.
Yeah, I won't name names.
Even I'm not that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the caliber of folks that I'm talking about. And that's kind of a part of my evolution of being here on Google Plus and having to actually speak to Christians. Because some of them are people too.
Yeah, of course.
Agreed.
And here's the thing: I don't think anyone's. This is a problem with the whole narcissism argument, though, is that I don't think a lot of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, are not immune to that kind of thing. I think we all have a little bit of narcissism in us. So
never.
So I mean, using that kind of thing, but I get what you're saying. I know it's a different type of narcissism, but I think there's like a few different types, I guess, personality kind of traits, I guess, within these kind of Christian groups. But I think like the loud, outspoken ones like G-Man and that, yeah, they're all kind of similar to each other. Like they all kind of have like this very, what do you call it? Yeah, like very loud and outspoken extrovert type personality where they're not afraid to say their opinion and they're rude about it and all this other stuff, even if they're not trying to be.
Well, that's just a matter of filibustering. People like G-Man attempt to talk over you in order to prevent you from getting a word in, because they're worried that what you have to say might actually crush their position.
You know what? I would like to ask everybody here's a question. Who don't, if you're in the United States, it's more or less about Christianity. If you're outside the United States, whatever religion is dominant in your society. But more or less 5% of the population believes in some religion or some God concept. And for those of us in this room who don't believe in the God concept, we're in a really small minority of the human race. At any point, does that pure fact that 95% of the population disagrees with that position, does that lead anyone here to believe that their position could be wrong or make you want to reevaluate your position? Or are we so set on that position then that we can't change it? Are we that dogmatic in the position where you won't change it?
Not at all.
No, definitely not me.
The popularity of an idea has nothing to do with the validity of an idea. The majority of great apes on this planet, including us, are polyamorous genetically. Does that mean that we should all abandon our current ideas, whatever they may be? This argument is not popular.
Well, it depends who you ask, actually.
No, I know it's an argument ad populum, but just such an overwhelming majority of the population that believes in this concept. It makes, like, for me personally, it makes me even always, because I'm always reevaluating whether I'm at the right position. Because don't forget, that's 9, if you're in a room with 10 people, it's more or less almost 10 out of 10 people, except one, unless you got a midget in the room, then it's 9.5 out of 10 people who believe this position. So and I say that to say, are we so entrenched in our belief that this thing isn't true, that we are not looking at the fact that this thing maybe is true or could be true? Or are we blinded? It's kind of a self-evaluation of it.
No, not at all. There are several tendencies that human beings have because they are great apes. Just because our current society is productive and allows for one or two of them doesn't mean that they should be, adopted by everyone. That's just silly.
I think I can't speak for other non-believers, but I am always trying to reevaluate my positions, and that kind of began once I took a step away from Christianity. But it wasn't necessarily the fact that I was at one point a Christian and stepped away. It was because I realized at the time that I had held positions that kind of were almost forced upon me, or I was more or less coerced into believing or holding these beliefs of a belief system that I really did not know that much about. And so once I figured out that the way my mind's set up, the way that I come to conclusions wasn't really the best. Like the justifications that I had for some of my beliefs were not as solid as I liked them to be. So I said, okay, well, let me simply reevaluate myself. Let me reevaluate what I believe, and let me take it a step further. Almost every belief or strong belief that I have needs to be reevaluated now. If I'm going to be a Christian or any other religious denomination, I need to have ample evidence, and the best type of evidence that I can get my hands on if I'm going to, physically and mentally, spiritually change my life, because of it. And I think, that route has led me to where I am now, and to, always make inquiry and never just, I guess, kind of, rest on your laurels about, because I'm in this position, that I feel that I am justified right here and now, and this is how I'll always be. No, that is never my position. Because if there is some really convincing evidence, some extraordinary evidence that points to some type of deity or something that could be construed as a deity, then I'm going to be open to it.
What do you consider
your evidence? This is quick, because I feel like, because here's the thing, I got pretty disenfranchised with the whole Christianity thing, but I feel like there's enough evidence out there. I can't confidently say that there is no God or there's likely no God kind of thing, which is why only reason I don't take a position as an atheist. That's honestly not how I feel. But at the same time, like, what do you consider, like, what has to be good evidence for you? Because, I mean, I consider I have, like, enough to still believe that there's a God.
For me, it's not about what the population believes. I never want to believe anything just because.
Yeah, it's not just the population either.
Agreed.
For me, a lot of things that I like to contemplate are things that people consider to be wrong, and I like to wonder why people think they're wrong and then look into it.
But one thing about even this whole thing, and I don't want to get in a group thing, but I was a psychology major in undergrad, and there was this famous experiment where they would do is they'd put one person in a room and 10 other people, and the 10 other people would be in on the joke, but the one person would be the experimental person. And what they would do is they would show pictures, and everyone would agree, like, they'd say, all right, is this a picture of X? And everybody would put their hand up, because it was obviously a picture of X. And then, like, at the 10th picture, so everybody would agree on the first 9 images what they were. But on the 10th image, 9 people would raise their hand and say, okay, we all agree with this. And the last person would be obvious that the last picture was something different. And 70 to 80% of the time, the last person would raise their hand in belief that the picture was what it was. So I do agree that there was an overwhelming pull of conformity when it comes to this thing, and especially being brought up in a Christian home as myself. I want to conform. I want to be like everyone else.
Well, being brought up in a Christian home, you're surrounded by this stuff like a lot, so it's very easy to believe it because my mom was talking about it, my dad was talking about it, and then when my little brother and little sister came along, even though they're younger than me, they talked about it. So it was really easy for me to just, kind of go along, because those are the ideas that, even though I had access to other people, those are ideas I was like the most surrounded by. I mean, people that raised me. So I mean, of course, I'm going to be more interesting.
But I will always say that I don't think it could be so short shrift, because I believe if we were all together in a room and all of us pointed and said we saw something, a horse, a pony, whatever this thing may be, we said we all saw it, and the 10th person said they didn't see it, we would be more likely to believe the 9 people than the 1. And that's kind of where I'm trying to understand is that there something that we're missing? Is there something that we could be missing that is just that is that we're just not getting about the God concept or about the religious concept that everyone else seems to get? And I'm trying not to use it as an argument ad populum, but I'm also seeing it as an argument that maybe there's something more here that we just don't understand.
I think that what people were talking about earlier is indoctrination and conformity. And as far as what you're talking about, maybe we're missing something because people are more inclined to believe the majority, and things used to be that way. Now, science has gotten to the point where we no longer, we address argumentum ad populum and basically call it out on as bullshit whenever we have the chance. I was raised Christian. I have a similar history to Matt Dillahunty. I was actually studying the Bible because I was going to become a teacher, and that's what led me to begin studying other religions, which is what led me to begin studying the history, which finally led me to becoming an atheist.
Like I said, you guys approach it the wrong direction. Instead of the science thing, you got to go down the history route. Please, everybody.
Well, how would you define my experience from atheism to theism? Because for me, having a family that is Christian, Christian heritage, with that whole, it'll be easy to conform to the faith because everyone follows that. For me, that wasn't actually the case. It was more about being a little bit annoyed, follow along, go to church, that sort of thing on special
you're a different type personality.
I think what you're saying is that you're saying that didn't happen with me, so how do you explain me? That's a simple concept of you are the exception, not the rule.
There's a lot of people that have different personalities. Not everybody's the same.
To be more specific, for me, what then drove a further yearning of, going to the next level, so to speak, or to the next gear, was the initial findings of, this looks interesting, and it was not after anyone's influence. It was my own, using the sampling method, my own critical investigation, that then led me to go, hang on a second, there is something here, and it's just the raw data that then made me realize, okay, maybe there's something here, rather than an emotional, response, faith response.
Absolutely, there are several people of different kinds that join a religion or convert for several different reasons. However, what you will find chiefly is that anyone's religion is chiefly a matter of geography. Your religion is dependent on where you were born and the religion of those who raised you.
Well, I was born in India, and I've seen the fruits of Hinduism as a young boy until the age of 9. Then we migrated to Australia, and I can tell you that I still vividly remember the sterility of the whole cow and Hinduism and so on, which is just totally sterile here in the West. Like the roads are clean and clear, and you won't have the 4 festivals that the Indians practice. And
yes, I understand what you're trying to say. Once again, you're repeating that this was not your experience, and this is not how it happened with you. My response, again, is the same, that you are the exception, not the rule. What you will find is that most of the time, a person's religion is dependent on their geography, which is why religion seems to have borders as a result of this. Where you go, this is why we know, if we went to India, what would we expect most of the religion to be? If we went to China,
right,
what would we expect most of the religion to be? So on and so forth.
It's a bit deeper.
And curiously, this is why when Zula was asking the question about truth outside the Bible, curiously, this is where I caused a little bit of controversy in saying that if I were to see a Hindu in heaven, I wouldn't be surprised, in a nutshell. Or if I was to see a Muslim in heaven, I wouldn't be surprised, because
hating on heresy, sir.
Within the Quran, that to a fundamentalist is like saying there's many roads that lead to heaven. Technically, no, I'm not saying that. But I am appealing to what's called redemptive analogies, which is in the Bible. Acts 17 is all about that.
You read that thing? Damn.
Yeah.
My response when someone mentions heaven in any caliber is usually to say, which heaven? There are several thousands of different religions that have their own version of what would happen after we die, their own instructions for life, and their own creation stories, so on and so forth. Even just Christianity alone, of course. For example, the Catholics believe that there's a place called purgatory, and that there is only one heaven, while the Mormons believe that there is no such thing as purgatory, and there are actually 3 different heavens. How exactly does one person prove that their story is correct and all others are myth?
Yeah.
The person is doing.
But look at the timing of these perspectives, though, because when you go back, the further back you go, the more narrower it actually becomes.
How so?
The so-called. So if you go back to the 1st century, Christianity and Judaism were pretty much.
Say my phone just rang. I want to answer it. I'll be right back. My apologies.
Damn, it's getting good too.
Okay.
We're getting into it.
Yeah.
I'm in a raid right now. Fuck.
See, that's what happens when you get all the logical Christians in here.
Hold on.
Yeah, cordial discussions happen.
Did Harius get in?
It becomes a lot harder for the atheists to disagree with him.
I kid you not, if he came
okay.
in here right now, he just would.
So what's the conversation about?
Uh-oh.
How Christians are stupid.
No, we were having a conversation about a bunch of different things, actually.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say, MP left. I find it interesting that I think that the delimiting factor for a lot of people that I guess would preclude them from having such religious beliefs just in general is that do you or do you not value your personal experiences as much as others? Because I find that for Christians or just almost any religious group is that they really, 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 really value personal experiences. So especially if something traumatic or something I guess you could consider fairly remarkable happens, that is has more of an impact than something that you could test in a laboratory using a scientific method, so on and so forth.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually take into account the supernatural as being credible at times. I don't say every single person's experience is true because I don't know. I wasn't there. But at the same time, it's like I think that, to say that every single one of these things is like either an illusion or hallucination, whatever, it's pretty far-fetched to me.
No, that's not really what I'm trying to say, and maybe I need to explain it a bit better. So if I give you actually a really good example, my cousin, who I grew up with and who everyone thought was my brother because we were so close and so very similar, he and I experienced the same exact scenario. We were at an intersection, and this car just blows the stop sign just completely. And then he and I both interpreted it as, this is divine intervention, because if that car would have hit us, we would have probably been dead. Like this guy had to be going at least 60, 65. And so that had to be some type of divine, intervention that prevented us from doing that. After I deconverted, I re-examined that scenario and I looked at it very differently. That had nothing to do with divine intervention. Is that my cousin never shoots off the brake from when he's at a stop sign. That's something he never does anyway. So even if at this one point that we would have had a deity, how could I have been able to discern the difference between a deity acting on our behalf and my cousin honestly just not being that type of driver that would have put us in danger in the first place? So I think it's very interesting how sometimes that interpretation can play a role. And I gotta go talk to King Carcaduck. I'll catch you guys later.
All right. Well, it becomes a lot harder to dismiss things when it's actually like a supernatural kind of event. But since there's pretty much nothing but...
I think it's easy to dismiss supernatural events.
Well, it's easy to dismiss them when you don't have them happen to you.
Oh, I've had things that could be construed as supernatural happen to me and just no longer believe them to be supernatural. And now when things similar to that happen, I don't construe them as supernatural.
Depends on what you mean by supernatural. Because when I say supernatural, I mean out of the ordinary. I don't mean like the laws of physics were changed or suspended or anything.
I should say paranormal.
Yeah.
There you
go. That's what I should say.
Okay, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. generally, you were saying something about things getting narrower as you go back.
Yeah, if you study religion as far back as you can.
Yes.
I find it fascinating, and there's actually a book out there titled God's Rivals. It's a Christian author, but he's an ancient Near Eastern scholar, and he's sensitive to the other religious, perspectives, originating in the ancient Near East. And it is interesting to note that the terms like Sheol and Hades, they're very vague terms, both in Hebrew and Greek, to describe the outside, so to speak, the underworld or the heaven above. And even as a Christian, and he himself mentions, and pretty much any ancient Near Eastern scholar will mention, that human imagination starts to then take over. And then when there's new religions that start to form, like for example Islam, then you start to have levels of hell, and then you start to have levels of heaven, which is evidently in the Quran and in the Hadiths. And then, fast forward many centuries later, and then you have, like in Mormonism, you have many levels in with respect to heaven and hell. Jehovah's Witnesses have a certain perspective on, if you're just good enough, you'll remain on earth, but if you're part of the 144,000, you'll be in heaven with God. And the irony is that, for example, just that interpretation alone, that 144,000, when you go back to the original context of what John was getting at, and in his first century Second Temple context, that is a complete misunderstanding of what it originally meant. And so there's this, that it's like a legitimate right way in looking at the stuff as originally written, versus as humans evolve socially, and as the population grows, and hence when migrations take place, then it sort of becomes a little bit like Chinese whispers, where unfortunate corruptions of the original context takes over, and hence the original context is lost. And, an ever-growing, constant new perspectives on, what heaven is about, what hell is about. And so the key is to go as far back as possible in order to root out faulty ideas. And so that's what I like to look at. I like to go back to the original.
As far back as you can go.
Yeah. Oh, how far back we can go? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, that's
you can go as far back as you can. What I mean.
That's one of the main problems, that you can't go back far enough. Maybe you can.
But wait a minute, what do you mean? Christianity is one of the youngest religions on the planet. There are other religions that existed long before.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying
it was plagiarized from surrounding cultures, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, and so on.
I'm saying
I'm confused.
I'm saying we can't go back far
Christianity
enough.
Is
can't go back far enough to
Christianity is a the furthest we can go back is basically cuneiform writing, and sort of pre-Abraham era. I mean, we can date humanity, like agricultural stuff, going back to the end of the last ice age. So we're talking 40,000, 30,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we can also date back musical instrumentation that far back. So there is in a sense some form of spiritual thing going on, but we don't know what they thought. And so, but the Mesopotamian material is interesting because they can go back to probably 10,000 BC, and there seems to be a collective idea on what was happening in a local context, and that is humanity in the Arabian Peninsula area, and hence what I believe to be recent evidence that there's a flooding event in that region. And then the material that you see in the Mesopotamian stuff, the cuneiform texts, they're basically they actually help the information that you see in Genesis, and then you just go along with that narrative down until Christianity comes on the scene. And Christianity is basically a fulfilled Judaism in that regard. So don't forget, the Christians in the first century, they didn't have a New Testament canon or any form of New Testament documents for about 30 years. So when they preached Good Friday and Easter Sunday, they only preached from the Old Testament. And so, yeah. I'm just wondering, is my mic, like, does it break up now and then, or is it
Only a
clear to
slight
go?
bit. I can hear you regardless. It's only a minor annoyance.
I don't
Okay.
even hear it.
Nothing to worry about.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah,
But
I still think going down the, like I was saying before, the history route is probably the best route in order to really get a grasp on the stuff and to verify it or not. Because so far what we have is we have a bunch of different people saying these different things in the texts. And then we get atheists saying, oh, yeah, that's not true. We can't prove it scientifically. And even some atheists even throwing out like, oh, there's no historical evidence. And then you get like the Bible nerds saying, well, actually, if you look at like the original text and everything, and here's the original Hebrew and Greek, and here's some other things that match up, then it's like, oh yeah, now the atheists look pretty silly now, don't they? And then it's like, well, you're only going back so far. It's like, can you go back farther than that? Can we track where some of these manuscripts that even come from? Like, is there any way for us to really know that this is like, for sure, like either a legend or the truth? I mean, I lean more on like the truth.
Historicity usually mention things like Tacitus and Josephus and so on and so forth. But
I hate hearing about them.
Paragraphs, like for example, that Josephus mentioned, he's telling about divine prophets and such, but he never mentions who those prophets are or what they said and so on and so forth. This is just religious propaganda. It's not history.
It might have been a forgery.
But the atheists or the people who aren't Christians who hold to this view, it's a very minute and small view. A lot of scholars, well, practically only 2 scholars hold to this view. So I don't see why this is it's such a popular view among atheists, but among scholars, this is not consensus.
What do you mean?
That's not consensus.
Which view exactly?
The Jesus mythicist view.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because there's like a whole bunch of people that would say that he was for like a real person.
Argument ad populum again, though. Just because a lot of scholars say it.
Yeah, but I mean, they actually look into this stuff. They're not just saying it. We're not talking like the general public. We're talking like the people who actually study this stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm hearing these people say there's very little evidence that Jesus even exists. It's like, where did this come from? Because pretty much all my life, it's been other people that saying that he did.
The only academic book that I will recommend even Christians to read is Richard Carrier's 2014 the Historical Jesus. That probably, and I think it's 700 pages. I have it on my iPad, and I've been reading the first 100 pages. And yeah, as far as scholarship goes, I would consider it the first actual academic. What's the word? It's his first. It's the first try. Yeah. It's the first attempt. Oh, the word I was looking for is attempt. It's the first attempt in describing the mythicist position as to, well, here's why. And at the same time, even with the material I have read, like not in response to mythicist views, but just general knowledge in regards to ancient Near Eastern ideas and histories and blah 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 blah. I hate to say it, but sometimes this key passage, like for example, Richard Carrier will refer to Galatians 4 and Galatians 3 as speaking of a cosmic Christ, that Paul had in mind a cosmic Christ, and then that doesn't fit with the gospel narratives. But then that's where I have to wonder, like, okay, Richard Carrier, I get where you're coming from with this, because there is like a Gnostic flaring. But have you considered the fact that Paul's alluding to certain Old Testament texts that then appeal to what the gospel writers were getting at, and that is the actual history of Jesus and why he came and the locations he would enter into, and on it goes, which Richard Carrier doesn't mention.
He feels a little too confident about his position for me. I do like. I've seen his like some videos where he did like his speeches.
He's on the,
What exactly do you say?
he's like
who tells
he's using the right information, but he's coming up with the wrong interpretation.
General?
Is basically in a nutshell what I can say.
My apologies for interrupting. When a person tells you
go
they
ahead.
have
Go ahead. Yeah.
that when a person from a different religion than yours says that your religion is incorrect, and they have prayed and spoken to their particular deity, and so on and so forth, and their deity says that your deity doesn't exist and you're just hallucinating, and so on and so forth, what do you say to them? Why are they incorrect?
Well, I wouldn't deny that deity. That's what I would say.
Well, the bottom line point is it's not possible for your deity and your Bible to be correct without simultaneously declaring that all other religions on the planet are just myth made up by men.
But
right?
that's my point. When I brought up the book God's Rivals, I'm not denying the other religions. I'm not denying the existence of other gods.
So then you believe that there is more than one God on this planet or in the universe or whatever?
Yeah, very possible.
I would say either they're hallucinating or whatnot.
And that doesn't mean I'll just quickly say this, that doesn't mean I'm a polytheist. But I do hold to a form of monolatrism, where Yahweh is the true God, obviously, in that regard.
What does the true God mean? You mean the one that you should be talking to while ignoring the others, or the one that exists while the others do not? I'm confused.
The one who you should be having a loyalty to rather than the others. You're not denying the existence of other gods. So I'm going to be joined to this particular God, which is Jesus.
Okay, so it's a position of loyalty, not a position of which one exists.
Yahweh being the only one unique God among the rest.
But this is what every religion says. Everyone says my God is the special one in some way, shape, or form, and all the others are. Mine is the one special black sheep. Mine is the unique one. This is what everyone says from every religion.
Yeah,
right. But... And so that's why you put to test, like, because these are all models of reality, and you test the models of reality. So when I look at Islam, and there are genuine Muslims that genuinely believe in Allah and the Prophet, when I ask them key questions in regards to certain things in the Quran, I can't help but notice that in some sense it is a man-made text, because in some areas you can clearly see the plagiarism in Muhammad in the Quran.
This is what I just said about the Bible, though, and several other religions.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. For example, there was a myth in the 2nd century AD that Abraham was saved from the fire of the Chaldeans. And the Genesis story says Abraham was saved from Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur is an Ugaritic word that means city, so the city of the Chaldeans. But Ur, the same phonetic sound in Hebrew, means fire. And then you have a scribe in the 2nd century AD, totally ignorant of Ugaritic, mistranslate that word, and then an entire legend came out of that. But yet it appears in the eternal word of Allah, which is the Quran.
But there's in the Bible with Jesus riding on 2 donkeys story.
That's not 2 donkeys in that regard. But just quickly, stick on this point though, because
I apologize.
1 second, stick on this point, because here we have another religion, which is Islam. Here we have another God, Allah, who clearly says he's not a trinity, that he has no son, that he's one and unique. The whole concept of Tawheed. And so I guess it comes down to who's actually more informed on the data rather than just mere emotional belief. So and it's not boasting, it's just being honest. Like, I'll come to a Muslim and say, hey, have you actually read the misinterpretation or the mistranslation of this word dating back 4 centuries prior to Muhammad? Have you actually seen the legends that came out of this faulty translation, which according to your theology, if the Quran is the eternal word of Allah, then for all eternity, Allah was ignorant of Ugaritic.
Wait,
and a lot of Muslims see this, and they do. It does shake their faith. But at the same time, I'm not going to deny a certain supernatural influence that may have actually indeed happened in Muhammad's calling as a prophet. And hence, when I say that, I'm obviously speaking about the fact that it may have been an evil divine influence rather than.
What'd you say about the mistranslation of the fire thing?
You're pointing out an inconsistency in someone's religious text. I'm pointing out that there are inconsistencies in everyone's religious text because they are written by men. But the bottom line is that we don't even need to get into these red herring details. We can step all the way back and look at it from the big picture, which is there are many religions on this planet, each with their own religious texts, and these religious texts come into conflict with each other, making it difficult for anyone to say that they believe that all these gods exist or multiple gods and so on and so forth, unless that is what your particular religion promotes, that there are multiple gods, for example, the Greeks and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is which one of these religions has provided evidence for their supernatural claims? Each one, when you ask them, you get nothing but anecdotal stuff or attempted interpretations from their religious texts and so on and so forth.
And one religion being wrong does not automatically make another right.
I agree.
No, I'm not. But I'm not. That's another thing. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Christianity by default is now correct because Islam's wrong. All I'm doing is here's a model of reality according to this Christian religion, which did come before Islam. Then Islam comes along, supposedly being a follow-up to Christianity. And I mean, when you look at the deep discussions between especially Arab Christians and Muslims, you'd be surprised as to see how in-depth that stuff can get. And then the end result is that, yeah, the Quran is actually a man-made document and nothing more than that. And Muhammad may have very well, in fact, been satanically influenced, so to speak.
I'd like to meet the real Christianity. No, the real Christianity. Yeah, if you guys happen to see it roaming around, tell them I'm looking for it. There's many Christianities. There are as many Christianities, perhaps, as there are good peeps who think about Jesus. You know, I can't find this real Christianity thing. I would sell it if I could find it, you know, by the court.
Well, the original word was the way.
Mm.
In Acts 9, like the way, they were called the way, not, you know, Christian is just it's just a coin term by.
It's a very modern label for dead.
Right. I find that most Christians seem to subscribe to the habit of quoting their religious text and forgetting that other religions do the same thing. They quote their religious text, and while you quote yours, it has meaning to you. It doesn't to anyone else who hasn't subscribed to your particular religion.
Sure, but it is comparing the data though. So here's a model of reality, which is in this case what the Bible is presenting. Then you have a model reality, which is what the Hadith and the Quran is presenting. Then you have the Vedas and the Mahabharata in Hinduism, and you have
what model of reality?
This raw data that you then analyze and compare with each other.
So you're saying you make a judgment depending on which one seems to have the most accurate description of reality. Therefore, all of its supernatural claims must therefore be correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
This is no different than the idea that if someone 2,000 years from now were to discover an old Spider-Man comic, they know the historicity of the city of New York, and since New York is all over this comic, this Spider-Man person must therefore also have existed at one point.
Yeah, but a Spider-Man comic is not like deity in any way. We understand it's a Spider-Man comic. That's a really bad example.
It's especially nowadays when you actually got like
perfect example. The point of the example, this text describes things that do exist, and therefore, if there are things in here that you can confirm exist, everything else that you haven't confirmed must automatically be accepted.
Well, who really goes around trying to prove
the problem with that?
Spider-Man comic?
The problem with that argument.
That's not the point.
I have a quick public service announcement, real quick. Our sin is forgiven. Whew, Jesus did it. That's all. Carry on. Thank you.
Isn't that the most important part, according to you guys?
The problem with that argument is a fictitious perspective on things, like in this case, is Spider-Man, Superman. No one would care about that stuff back in the 1st century, or even prior in the BC era. That the type of amusement that we have today is not something they would spend their time on because of the resources. They didn't have the resources for that sort of thing.
But that is not the point.
So
of my
in regards to no, but actually, what I'm getting at is, in this case, when the Gospels are recorded, or any other extra biblical text is recorded, it's for a specific significant argument that's trying to be made. Here we have just a plethora of contradictory Spider-Man accounts in fictitious writing for the sake of amusing people, and I would not
the purpose
make
of the comic
connection.
The point I'm trying to make is, it was a response to something you said. It was actually your argument, which was, there are things in your text that are accurately described, for example, places and events, so on and so forth. And since they can be confirmed, then the other things that we cannot confirm must therefore automatically be accepted as true.
Yeah, but it depends on the.
Then the same thing can be said. In this case, the same thing can be said to the Quran, because the Quran mentions prior things, just like the Spider-Man comics mentions New York City.
Right.
The Quran mentions prior things, yet it gets it wrong.
I think that's a silly thing to think. I would never say that since there's some things in this book that can be confirmed, the names of places, for example, I must therefore automatically assume that everything else that's in the book is fact.
No, because the author's intent of the Spider-Man comic is not to let the whole world worship Spider-Man. I'm pretty sure he understands that Spider-Man
That's not the point of the argument.
You're missing the point.
No,
he's completely missing the point.
No,
okay, I'll try backing up. My apologies. Forget the Spider-Man comic. The Bible mentions 1 or 2 places, or 4 or 5 or 60 or 70 places that actually do exist. It accurately describes actual places in the world that we know of, certain mountains and things like that. Since we can confirm these places that do exist in the Bible, and the Bible accurately described them, should I also accept when the Bible says that several people rose from the dead?
It
like a zombie apocalypse.
You have
it depends on what?
It depends on the author's intent. You have to look at the author's intent. Is the author trying to teach you a historical lesson, or is it
point?
It does not
That
matter.
is the point.
No, it's not.
Does the author is he trying to?
I guess
that's not what he's trying to say.
Backdrop or not? Because the author of a Spider-Man comic is just he's writing out a story for entertainment. It's not historical.
That's not what he's trying to argue about.
I understand, and I apologize for the misunderstanding. I did say forget about the Spider-Man comic and start it from scratch. I'll try again one more time. I'm not trying to be offensive.
Let's see if he follows it this time.
Okay.
I don't care about being offensive.
This is a book that has information in it, and I need to and you want me to accept that when the book claims that 600 people rose from the dead, you want me to accept that as fact. And the reason why you're saying I should accept it as fact is because the book also mentions this mountain in this place, and we can go there and verify this mountain existed, so the book is not lying about that. Therefore, by proxy, it must not be lying about the zombies, right?
No, those things are irrelevant. What you want to find out is you want corroborative evidence in relation to the event that's being claimed.
Where exactly can I find corroborative evidence about several people rising from the dead? How about a
now the only illustration in regards to that would be, so the only resurrection from the dead that I hold to from the biblical account is only Jesus. The claim, I think you're probably referring to Matthew 27.
Could you define that for me? What do you mean by your hope? Is the only one you believe, or am I wrong?
No, I think you're referring to Matthew 27, that the graves were opened and people came out. Is that
Yeah,
the text you're referring
Lazarus,
to?
stuff like that.
Right. So I would prefer.
to imply that Jesus was the only one that rose from the dead, which would be incorrect according to the Bible.
Yeah, sorry. I would. I thought you were referring only to the resurrection, like in regards to the Matthew 27. Yeah. So in this case, Lazarus, I would hold to as being risen from the dead. But the Matthew 27 account is an eschatological perspective. It's not. It didn't happen when Jesus died.
I'm not interested in when it happened. I'm just pointing out that something happened that is extraordinary, and therefore I'm looking for extraordinary evidence with which to confirm it. There are several cases of people rising from the Bible, for example. Elijah,
to just rephrase your question.
Yes.
So to rephrase your question, you're basically saying, say if we had 99.9% verification of everything in the Bible, but the 0.1% outlier would be these fantastic claims, which are few.
Correct.
They mentioned very fewly in regards to the Lazarus coming from the grave and so on.
Correct.
And that is a legitimate point. I would concede that. Yeah. So
did I hear earlier that you said you were a scientist, or am I mistaken? There were many people talking.
No, I'm a physics student.
Okay, then I'm sure you understand my position, which should be anyone's position, really. No matter how much you have confirmed, it is not a legitimate reason to accept the next extraordinary 1% or 0.01% that you named without confirmation, simply based on the other stuff. For the record,
for me,
I think it's still nice to be cautionary, though. I mean, if you're going back from a purely logical perspective, just because if a whole bunch of evidence, for instance, that lines up that, for instance, let's say, I guess taking this, I won't mention any names here, but just taking a scenario I can think of into my head, where if somebody, they come home and they realize that, oh, wow, there's like a lot of evidence around that. Looks like somebody might have, broken into my house. However, there's no evidence that the person who broke my house is still in the house. I think it'd still be smart for me to take a precautionary measure to kind of, be careful until I know for sure that person is still not.
This analogy is inapplicable because they are both related to the same event. What I'm trying to say is, if the Bible has some things that ring, this should be with any book, with any bit of information coming from anyone's mouth, book, anything. This is common sense, actually. I shouldn't have to split it out this way. But
I have common sense in science.
I'm sorry?
We don't use common sense when we're doing science. We use a particular.
Okay, then I'll splay it out then. From any story coming from anyone's mouth, book, television, movie, no matter what the source of information is, just because some parts of the information ring true does not mean that you should automatically accept the rest of the information without scrutiny.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think these people are in disagreement with that.
No, I assume that was the case because General's response to me with the reason why he chose the Christian religion over the others is explain that the others do not accurately describe things as well as the Bible does.
But I do think that, in the whole thing that
it's not just that though. Allow me to
evidence for like what's happened that we can confirm. It's like I still think you might not think it's logical in your opinion, but it's like there is still a reason for them to believe the other stuff. It's like, hey, if there's enough of it that's making sense. It's like, what are the chances the other stuff is there?
With you.
Well, there's a good reason to dismiss it. I mean, we know for a fact that World War II happened. Does that mean the Angels of Mons happened too?
Agreed.
Does that mean what?
But none of this constitutes extraordinary evidence or the extraordinary.
But the reason why General and I are Christians is because we believe that the view that Jesus rose from the dead is the best explanation among all the others.
So that ultimately the point. One second. The point is this: if there is a God, what's the best and most efficient way for him to reveal himself to us? And fundamentalist Christians will probably only appeal to this written Bible. And I would say no. The only tangible experience you can ever have with this being is basically what the incarnation's about, which is the photo that you're seeing that I use, this hypercubist crucifixion that Salvador Dali painted.
I don't know, like, why can't he just show up?
Are you saying
why can't he just show up?
When
a god to reveal himself to us? Is that what you're asserting? That this is the best way, and therefore it must be correct? Because
the most efficient to account for everything, to account for the purposes of why the universe exists to begin with. And the early church had this, this concept of theosis and a whole second reality that will then wrap up everything that we know, and then we'll be in a glorified state. That's in the so basically all these fantastic things that happen, like the Lazarus rising from the dead and so on, just this one act alone, which can be historically verified, this thing of resurrection of Jesus, alongside the theology of the Bible. Once that's verified, everything falls into place.
How is it verified?
It's verified through basically the stuff we research, the historical narrative, what the scriptures have said, and extra biblical writings as well.
There are no extra biblical accounts of the Jesus character. I hate
plenty
to say something that a millennial would say, but in before Tacitus and Josephus.
I'm pretty sure there's even, if depending on the dating of it, even in the Qumran community, there's a lot of there's big debate on whether the message somehow went to the Qumran community, and yet we're still dating it in a BC era. So they're still trying to work that out. But what mentioned? You have to remember the New Testament.
Mentioning Lazarus.
One second. The New Testament writings are not theology books. They're not religious texts. Once you strip away the word religion or supernatural or spiritual from the writings of, say, the book of Revelation or something like that, and say you look at Revelation 12 in regards to the birth date of Jesus, there's a lot of corroborative evidence as to how the heck do these people know this stuff that only now with modern sophisticated technology we can actually verify.
Know what stuff?
Yeah, like what?
In this case, the birth date of Jesus.
The birthday of
When is the birthday of Jesus?
When is the birthday of Jesus?
11 September 3 BC.
How do you know?
And Herod dying in 1
Where
BC.
exactly did you get this information?
So Revelation 12 describes the constellations in the night sky as appealing to the birth of this king of Israel, which is Jesus. It mentions the woman is clothed with the sun, the moon's at her feet, she has 12 stars on her head. With astronomy software, the only one time that alignment occurs with the retrograde motion of Jupiter passing Regulus is on that day. And it just so happens to coincide with the what the ancient Jews believed, and that is the birth date of Jesus, the birth date of Noah. In the month of September. So when Matthew gives you details like Herod had to kill children 2 years and younger, that means Jesus must have been at least 2 years or younger when that happened. And then we know when Herod died, which now we have to reevaluate that to 1 BC. Everything falls into place in the so-called religious text. And so my next question would be, if John's writing this in 68 AD, where do they have the ability? I mean, I'm not 100% asserting that John's getting this through divine revelation, but sense of accuracy to maintain an accurate astronomical record of the timing of when the birth date took place. It's little technicalities like this that speak out to me in the sense that, yeah, this stuff is serious stuff. It's not like someone just out of a whim just wrote this down.
Well, now that you've completed that retort, I'm sorry. You just said these people have proven that they knew exactly when Jesus' birthday was, right? And you gave the explanation.
No, not proven. They just recorded what
Okay, so
in this case the astrologers, which is the Magi, what they observed in the night sky, and it was preserved until John wrote it in Revelation.
Okay, and why do you feel that this is information that should not have been knowable until now?
Because the church, and it's the fault of the early church for not recognizing that Revelation 12 is one of the key tools in interpreting the birth narrative of Jesus. They would only appeal to Matthew and Luke's account with the census and so on.
I'm still confused. What information that you feel that they had back then that they should not have had? Astrology?
No. What I'm saying is the Magi, the only people that would even care about the night sky were those Magi, the astrologers and astronomers.
There were several people who cared about the night sky long before this in the surrounding cultures, especially Mesopotamian. Please go on.
Only a Mesopotamian context, a Babylonian context. And they record the stuff. Then they come and this information is fed into the Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin and so on. And the only time this is even recorded in a significant way is in 68 AD by John himself when he's in prison. So the question is, if this stuff never happened, okay, let's pretend it was an entire myth, this Jesus birth and so on. John in Patmos is writing down accurate details of what happens in 3 BC. In 68 AD, he's writing this.
How is he able to write down accurate details 60 years later?
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. How did he write it down?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. That's a little concerning.
So if it's a myth, then why is he, with pinpoint accuracy, detailing the night sky that would only appear in 3 BC?
Oh, I don't know, LSD. Maybe, you know, in those cultures, night skies were accurately...
You're talking about fulfilled prophecies now, right? Am I correct?
No, not fulfilled prophecy. I'm talking about a historical event in his thinking.
And then all he did was...
Let him finish. Hold on, give him a minute.
No, go ahead. By the way, this is like one example out of many.
Right. I would like to hear what General has to say. What you're pointing out is information in the Bible that someone wrote down about an event that they had not yet witnessed that will happen later on. Am I correct?
The only witnesses would be the Magi.
No, he said that he was writing in 68 AD things that happened in 3.
Yeah. I'll just bring up a photo just so you can...
Which is concerning to me, but...
Why would it be a problem for you?
Well, you know, where did he get the information? You know, how do we expect a man to live to be 68 years old if he was... John was one of those disciples, right? So how do we expect a man to live to be 68 years old in a time when people live to be, 40? We discussed this before.
Man, we don't even have any confirmation for who even wrote the books of the Bible.
So here's, I don't know if you can... I don't know if my mic will be breaking up because I'm sharing this.
Wait. Let him finish his point because you guys are moving the goalposts to things that aren't being discussed.
No, not at all. I want to hear
in any way.
I definitely would never shift the goalpost. I want to hear everything in detail. Please go on.
Okay.
So is my mic breaking up because I'm sharing this and I'm pretty sure my internet connection is slow at the moment.
No,
it's okay. You still sound clear, and I can see a picture whenever you speak.
So yeah, here's Sterelium. It's an astronomy software. It's for free. You can get it. And you go to the month of September in 3 BC, especially on the 11th of September, which the 11th of September is the new year in the Jewish calendar. It's Rosh Hashanah. Now on that day, you have a retrograde motion of Jupiter, but before it goes into retrograde, it passes Regulus, as you can see over here. So this would be the Star of Bethlehem, according to the account, because you take into account Regulus, the king star, Jupiter, the king planet, And Jupiter has a huge history in Babylonian astrology, and Leo, the king constellation. And then there's this mythical idea that they have that a king will come out of this three-tiered overlap of Leo, Regulus, and Jupiter. And then at the same time, here you have Virgo,
Hold on a
clothed
moment
with the
before you
sun.
run off. Who said that a king was going to come out of this overlap, and where?
When you look at Babylonian histories, and this is why some scholars who study the stuff, they're wondering if there's an overlap with what Daniel had to say with respect to the Messiah. And so there's a little bit of an investigation into that as to how did they have this idea of a Negev, the prince that would come out of this particular, to be the Jew. So then John then describes in detail the woman clothed with the sun, the moon at her feet, and she has 12 stars on her head, which would be Leo, which is 9, and then Mercury and Venus and Jupiter being 10, 11, and 12. And so now if he's writing this in 68 AD, who would have recorded the details of this constellation sky like this? That was over 50 plus years prior. If it's all a myth.
Pretty much every culture around him. And secondly, he only named a star pattern in the sky, probably referring to this. That he could have been making that up.
That's speculative. It could have been anything.
To make these details up, quite extraordinary, in my opinion.
To make up the details in Harry Potter is extraordinary. So what?
I think that's a non-sequitur.
So the one time these constellations align up perfectly like this, you're suggesting by pure happenstance he had this imaginative, like, yeah, I'll just put this together and voila, look, lo and behold, it actually matches.
Well, I didn't say he was making up the constellation.
And it matches the timing of Herod's death 2 years after he dies. So 3 BC, Jesus is born, 1 BC, he dies. Then it matches up with the census that Luke talks about. That's a pretty remarkable, just pure happenstance.
So wait, I'm confused.
I mean, him saying that Jesus was born under that alignment doesn't mean he did. He was.
So wait, how did the stars?
But John's writing that this was the case. So my question is, where did John get?
He's saying that it's the case.
Yeah, he's saying that it's the case. So
and I didn't say he made up the constellation pattern, the alignment. I didn't say he made that up. Like I said, what's his name? Generator said earlier, probably every culture in everywhere around them probably wrote about it.
Not every culture, but quite a few.
Well, I'm exaggerating.
I understand.
You won't find that. That's the point. You won't find this led, and I was speaking to Maxwell in Steve's hangout, in the prior hangout, in the side chat. Maxwell is an ex-JW, but I'm quite surprised as to how much he actually knows. Basically, he knows quite a bit. And I was interacting with him on exactly this. He agrees, by the way. He knows about this stuff. And he then I was talking to him in a passing comment saying, isn't it interesting that there was a scholar, it was a female scholar, she wrote for the Anchor Yale commentary, and because of this, well, not specifically in this much detail, but because of this astrological significance, she thought that the only person that would fit the memory, so to speak, or to retain the memory sky would be John the Baptist, because John the Baptist would easily be in very close to the BC era, and we're talking, probably 10 AD or something. And so she thought John the Baptist was the author of Revelation, but now 20 years after her work, she's had to recant and say, sorry, research shows that obviously it's John the Apostle. In 68 AD, he wrote this, and there you go.
Again, you're expecting a man to be 68 years old in a time when most people live to be about 40.
He would have been pretty old. I'm talking, he would have been like 80 plus years old. Yeah, but he's in prison writing down a text to the 7 churches, and in the midst of his writing down Revelation, he writes about this ancient thing that happened, which is the birth of Jesus. And he writes it without any contradiction to the night sky.
I'm not claiming any contradiction to the night sky. I'm claiming that he is claiming that Jesus was born on that day with no evidence.
But he, and so my question is, why is it accurate? First and foremost, why does it fit? It perfectly aligns and it makes sense with the Matthew account, which is obviously about Jesus. It aligns with the census in Luke, which is about Jesus. John obviously is thinking about Jesus. It matches with ancient Jewish perspectives of the King Messiah that happens to happen on that day, paralleling Noah's birthday.
He was born on that day, without providing any evidence.
But not the year, though. He never mentions the year. He just says,
"And
I beheld a woman clothed with the sun," and all those details around it, astronomical details. He doesn't give a day, like a date.
And
so the only time that this alignment happens
is
on that day. That's the point. The next alignment that you have, and this is why it's caused a big stir on the internet. The next alignment is 2,000 years later, which happens to be the 23rd of this coming September in 2017. And obviously, I don't believe that holds any significance. It's just people getting all excited about it. But the point is, it's a very rare alignment. And so
there are a lot of fairly rare alignments.
Agreed. This has nothing to do with whether, again, this is
every 2,000 years.
This is what I was talking about earlier. What is the word kids use today? Conflation. The conflation of fact with the unbacked assertion. Yes, this factual thing is occurring or has occurred or will occur. That's nice. How does that prove that this assertion you're making is also fact?
Yeah, I have to use the Angels of Ammon again. I mean, we know the Battle of Ammon happened in World War II. Did angels actually show up and fight on the battlefield? I mean,
right. I mean, as far as constellations go, it was the Greeks that even came up with those coordinates in what was it? It was 900 BC, I think. That I don't even need to get into those details. Once again, his angels analogy is perfect. How exactly does pointing out something that's accurate prove the thing that is just an assertion and unbacked? Look, there's some truth.
Wait, what do you say about 900 BC? What was that?
During the Greek Dark Age, I think it was, during the end of the Mycenaean Palatian civilization. That was like, what was that? That was 900 BC, I think, or 1000 BC. The point I'm trying to make is that constellations, looking at the stars, is something that's much older than any of the characters in the Bible, or even older than the time the Bible was written.
I agree.
So,
yeah, I agree.
Why exactly is this astonishing to you? A man said, this constellation will occur, and therefore that is when this character will be born. I mean no offense when I say this character. I'll say Jesus from now on. I'm trying not to be invasive. I apologize.
I say character.
Wait, are you suggesting that this was actually written down in 900 BC, or are you just giving an analogy?
No, I'm giving an example of people who are already marking down constellations and predicting accurately when they would align, things like that, so that just in case you were trying to imply that this man seems to have an education on constellations when no one should have. Just a moment, just so you know, I can see on my security cameras that my wife is about to come upstairs. Let me unlock the door. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have security cameras in my shower. Continuing.
Can I just interject for a second? Was Drag not here earlier?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then I got a message really late.
Oh.
Hey, Sudo.
Hey, Wayne.
I always tell you got to.
I mean, another.
Yeah, you should do a radio show, man.
I keep getting told.
Another example.
I've also been told to do voice acting. Sorry, Solo. Go on.
Okay, I'm back. I apologize.
Okay.
But again, the bottom line point I'm trying to make is that just because a story has elements that ring truth, it doesn't mean the other parts you haven't verified are automatically true. And earlier you were talking about what was the most efficient.
All I'm doing is I'm not suggesting. Therefore Jesus. I'm not suggesting that at all. All I'm saying is, here's a text, Revelation. There's debate as to when it's written, composed. Someone, a prominent theologian said, John the Baptist. That's been debunked. Now it's between Domitian or Nero, that era, 90s AD or 68 AD. If it was Domitian, then that's even worse, because that's even longer. That he then writes this down and he still gets it right. But I'm obviously going, to be fair with the data, no, it's 60 AD. I would appeal to the fact that Revelation is speaking about the events at the time, not some futuristic thing taking place. But in the midst of that, John writes this peculiar vision about this woman clothed with the sun. You do get interpretations about the woman being the church or the woman being Israel, and there's overlaps to Genesis 37 about Israel having 12 stars, which would be the 12 tribes, and on that goes. Interestingly, when we then take into account with modern astronomy software and modern practices of, now with sophisticated maths, we can then align the constellations the way they would look like, whether we're talking 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Guess what? It suddenly just fits in perfectly.
I still say, so what?
Within an ancient narrative. And it'll fit in only in that date. You won't find that alignment taking place, say, 50 BC or 100 BC. It's only 3 BC. And he's recording this 60
There was
years
an
later.
alignment during a certain date. What exactly has convinced you that everything else this person said is correct? Because they said this alignment is going to occur, or
but notice that's a very general criticism, or a very shallow criticism.
I don't think so.
In regards to my accepting of Revelation, because it's not just Revelation 12 that I appeal to with respect to the authority of Revelation.
It has nothing to do with your accepting Revelation. This entire subject branch that we're currently on is because you're trying to prove that this is when Jesus was born. Which, if you ask any Christian,
we were being
that question,
technically the discussion was based on, when I rephrase your point, that 99.9% of the Bible is verified, and the other 0.1% would be the supernatural elements that we should be skeptical about.
Well, we led to this current orange because you were asked when he was born. Right.
So here I'm giving an example of part of that 99.9% verification. That here's a pretty fantastic accuracy within the text that should not be the case if it's just him writing out of his own imagination.
I do understand how we got here, but my response once again is that how is this fantastic? Because a man pointed out that a constellation was
fantastic because it's fantastic because first century prisoners did not write like this.
It's because someone in prison in the first century did not write this way. What exactly did he write? That a constellation would occur?
If you document, again, taking into account John the Apostle being an actual person, taking into account his walk with Jesus, all the stuff that happens, regardless of if we strip away the supernatural elements in regards to that.
Even accepting that as a presupposition. If you strip away the supernatural elements forget the word supernatural. If you strip away the elements of any story from anyone that you have not confirmed yet, and leave in only the elements that already conform with reality, then you can automatically say about anything that is not a religious text or a text that is trying to convince you of the unconfirmed information. That's capable of being said about anything. If you strip away the unconfirmed information and only leaving the information that's already. I'm sorry.
I'm saying that for the sake of argument. That these are serious monographs. They're not just for the sake of entertainment. These people had a purpose to write what they needed to write. So what we do is you then investigate and see the accuracy in what they wrote. They could be deceiving us. That's the point. There's a slim chance that it could be deceptive. And lo and behold, as far as I can tell, there's no deception involved.
As far as I can tell, there's plenty of deception involved.
There's a great deal of retroactive writing in the Bible. Like, for example, the two donkey story I mentioned.
I can see the.
But there's no two donkeys. where do you get the two donkey interpretation?
Right. You're right, because who was it that? 1 second. Sorry, as of like 60 seconds ago, I'm half here. I'm doing the best I can. My apologies.
Sorry, everybody. His voice box came out.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry about that. Do you remember the story of Jesus riding a donkey into Oh, you do. Okay. All right. Do you remember? Do you happen to know the original translation? Let me see if I can find a copy real quick. Bring it up. My Google foo is probably not as good as the younger people in here.
Oh, you'd be surprised if some of the younger people pull up.
Original translation.
Wait, what if Canada is Chris? Who's Christian anarchist? Is that a person that comes here, or is that like a person on TV?
He's in the room.
Yeah, he's in the room right here.
He's the guy with the glasses with the blue background.
That avatar.
Oh, with the anime character thing. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
the total.
I apologize. I didn't get the joke.
No.
My fault.
Pseudo, are you aware that you sound like Patrick Warburton?
No, I've never been told that. Do I now have to go look up Patrick Warburton to see who that is?
He plays Joe on Family Guy.
Oh, okay.
Or the guy in Ted, he's like, I might be gay, I don't know.
So do you have it? It's in Matthew 21.
Don't mind me, guys. I'm just sitting here getting younger.
All right.
Oh, Christian anarchist, what's up? Even though, like, you've been in the room for how long, and I didn't say anything to you?
Yeah, I've been about almost 10 minutes.
He joined pretty recent. No, he was there, and then he left, and he came back.
Yep,
okay.
Pretty much.
This is an interesting conversation because I feel like I can actually get both people's lines of logic here. I'm serious, like both sides.
If you get the other side, then you're a moron.
Well, okay. Well, what, in your opinion?
What if, what Wayne just said? What if Ganador is Christian anarchist changing his voice?
I'm so sorry about that.
I guess Christian anarchist is trolling us. He
always is.
He's a.
Now, to be fair,
he's inside this
troll anybody.
thing, so he can hear me, right? Okay, that's him talking.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. But, is this something that you guys do like daily or weekly or something, or it's just like is this a rare event?
Well, there's like this whole community thing called the Great Debate Community that Steve McCrae
in a way it
in
is
charge
rare.
of.
In a way it is rare because we don't get good counteractive arguments. Usually it's just very surface level stuff.
But like Steve McCrae runs his room quite a bit.
Sort of having
Solo admit it. It's not surface level stuff. It just becomes a lot of childish screaming and yelling and name calling.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It depends on which channel you hang around.
like the Sulu guy or Sulu? Sulu, was that his name?
No, it's Zulu, not Sulu.
I'm sorry. Isn't it only when people like him are present, or G-Man or something, when such people are removed?
Pretty much.
Doesn't it become like this?
Well, there's other people that are like them as well. So
Yeah.
But you understand what I mean, though. Is this something?
Yes.
How do I come back again and do this again? Like, what if I came next week or something? How do you? I don't see. Is there a subscribe button somewhere or something? How do you do this?
Well, I mean, it depends because these are all individual YouTube channels, right? So you have to subscribe to the individual channels that run the Hangouts. Because this
Follow
is
each other on Google Plus as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay.
And
So
if
what
you want to subscribe to my channel, if you want to subscribe to my channel, just type in my name on YouTube, Wayne Fillmore, and you can click on my logo and click subscribe. And
then you already probably know about Steve McRae's channel, so let me tell you that.
Yeah.
Look up mine.
Subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to my channel, and you'll
Subscribe
get a free bottle of holy water and some KFC chicken.
Christian Anarchist does Hangouts as well.
The joke would be funny if it came from the pseudo guy, right? Like, I was laughing earlier. He said, I think he called Sulu.
Oh, right. Well, let me explain. He criticized me for being childish and name calling, but he called me a loser first.
Yeah, I was a little. Well, I wasn't confused by that, but I was feeling like that's.
But see, he forgets that. He throws crap out. Then when you throw something back at him, he cries and says, me. So yeah, that's why I do it. Yeah, you're a poopy head. It's like,
you're a poopy head.
Yeah, but
and he hasn't learned that when you throw something out, you get it back 3 times over.
But if you join that,
okay. I need to head out of here. I really want to.
Anyways, Gandor, I put a link in the side there for the Great Debate Community group page. If you join that, then you'll be able to find most of these people here.
I still want permission to make my own page on the wiki.
Just quickly before Gandor goes, did you want to briefly touch on that 2 donkey thing or no?
Yes, actually, I would like to do it more than briefly. So when I come back, can we talk again? If I click on your picture, can I wait a minute?
If you click on his picture, you get his profile.
I guess. But well, your name is in the Hangout anyway, so I guess just stay in the Hangout and just chat with me in the outside chat.
You can just add him on.
What do I click? Follow? I think I.
Yeah, you can click follow.
Follow.
Yeah.
Follow people and pages. Okay, I got it. Okay.
I think you'll just have to send me a message and I'll look for the invite.
I would love to. And just as a suffix, I apologize if I came across as offensive. That was definitely
no, you didn't.
Not
I hope I didn't.
No, not at all.
I hope I wasn't appearing as.
Not even a little bit. There was a picture I forgot to post earlier that I know you were. I forget it was you or someone else that was mentioning the most efficient way for a God to reveal himself to.
Yeah, well, I just said show up.
Right.
Yeah,
This is a response that I had and I forgot to hit enter. There should be a link in the chat thing on the right for everyone to see, or it might be on the left if your computer's different. And I'm not sure if anyone has seen this image, but this is actually for every single action of the God that's in the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, took place in that tiny little circle. Seemed, just my opinion, but that seems inefficient.
Extremely inefficient.
I have an immediate response.
please, before I go, tell me.
Humanity was localized in that region.
No,
that's not a legitimate argument. Only when
it really was not.
When Acts 2 mentions Pentecost, you have the Jews going back into the wider Mediterranean region all the way to Spain. Spain, in the thinking, was the farthest point, and Paul hoped to reach Spain. So the activity extends even beyond that. But otherwise, the whole world is limited to that region.
My wife says they don't exist. My wife is Chinese, by the way. She said we don't exist. I said, what about the people of China who have a written and detailed history that goes back way further than that? She says we also believe in flying dragons. So she said we don't exist and we believe in flying dragons.
I'm Irish and so do we.
Okay. Let me.
No worries, Garrett. No, I don't
really
want to hold you too long, but you take a.
Right, I'm really glad that I got to meet you all, and I hope that I didn't just jump in and start, because I know that Sulu guy was talking a great deal. I didn't want to. Everyone seems to be very aggressive, and I'm not sure how to interject without seeming rude. I don't want to.
Simple. Just yell at him and tell him to shut it.
Yeah.
I don't have it in me to do that.
I do.
I really don't.
That's okay. A lot of other people do.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again. I'll probably catch you guys on the morrow or something. Stay safe and
or something.
Okay. Yeah, you take a.
Yeah, he's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Got out all the different points that I guess Pin would like to make, but I mean, he wouldn't be as nice about it.
I'm never as nice. You know me.
Even some of the points
I feel like you're making shit up. That's to me lying, whether you're doing that out of ignorance or not.
I don't know. My position's unique because I can actually look at both sides, and sometimes both of them kind of make sense at the same time. So it's just kind of hard to.
Thad, I just saw your comment. What was the fire translation? The point of that?
Yeah, you were talking about that. How something was mistranslated or something, and someone ran with it.
Oh, I know this one, and I think you don't mind if I go over this with in general.
Well, before you do
I want to
that,
know what General is saying because maybe you don't know what he was talking about.
Okay.
Before you do that, I just want to say very quickly, I'm going on